sent a message yet to Putin?
We're sending a message.
The United States military will stop you, and we will beat you harder than you've ever been beaten before.
Russia's hacked into a lot of things. China's hacked into a lot of things. Russia even hacked into the Democratic National Committee. We will be ready with serious political, economic, and military responses.
The message we sent, he'll know it. And it'll be at the time of our choosing and under the circumstances that have the greatest impact.
Right now, Senator, for us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia.
I think it would be great if we got along with Russia, because we could fight ISIS together, as an example.
We could slide into nuclear war very quickly from her declared policy in Syria. So I won't sleep well at night if Donald Trump is elected, but I sure won't sleep well at night if Hillary Clinton is elected.
Future high-end war between nation states or great powers, very highly lethal, unlike anything our Army has experienced, at least since World War II.
So a message is going to be sent. Will the public know it?
Hope not.
Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain Khan. The tensions between America and Russia have escalated ever since the both sides couldn't reach an agreement on Syria. Is the situation heading towards another Cold War or a nuclear world war situation? To discuss this topic, we have with us today the Vice President of Operations to the London Center for Policy and Research and a CIA-trained intelligence officer. Welcome to our show, Colonel Anthony Shaffer. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you for having me again. Good to be on.
Colonel Shaffer, recently there have been American and Russian escalation. Do you think there could be a war?
War is always a possibility based on the potential of miscalculation by either side. Because of the conflicts in the regions we're talking, miscalculation has happened several times. Both sides have made mistakes regarding targeting of the other side's resources. So I think the question becomes, will a potential mistake result in a larger expanded conflict? And I don't believe so at this point in time. I think both the Russians and the West, kind of led by the United States, has far too much to lose, both economically and politically, by any expansion of a conflict. So I see the Russian movement of nuclear weapons, the provocations in the North Sea where they overfly our ships, just as that. I think that Putin, while is clearly working to expand the influence of Russia, the prestige of Russia, as well as their re-insinuation in the Middle East, I don't see them being willing to put together a large global military force which could challenge the United States. And any such conflict would be immensely bloody, immensely expensive, and so, and frankly, Putin has been able to expand and retain influence globally under the current White House. So I just don't, and this White House has been reluctant to push back. So at this point in time, I think you'll continue to see provocations from Putin. I don't think for a minute you're going to see a large global conflict between Russia and the United States.
Colonel Shaffer, if a warlike situation occurs hypothetically, would the war be limited to Syria, or could it lead to a nuclear World War III situation?
I think, again, as I mentioned in my first answer, I think the likelihood of miscalculation in some of the tactical engagement environments, such as Syria, is highly likely. When you have aircraft, troops, complexity on layers of complexity, it is inevitable that something's going to go wrong, and you're going to see both sides bump against each other. I just don't think that Putin, especially with the amount of money that he still makes from his relationship with the EU, with the Europeans, and the investment that he's made in other areas, that they'd be willing to go toe-to-toe with the United States regarding a nuclear response. Both countries have significant numbers of nuclear weapons still left. Our nuclear triad, while it's been part of the U.S. political debate, and it's being upgraded, or the debate about it being upgraded, is still potent. And I don't think anybody who's rational would believe that you can, quote unquote, win a nuclear war or a nuclear exchange. I think the devastation would be unimaginable. So I do believe that there are rational thinkers on both sides of the issue. And let's remember, the British have a vote, the French have a vote. We have a number of nuclear powers which are clearly engaged in whatever would happen regarding a nuclear conflict. So at this point, and again, I've talked to the experts here. I was having a conversation with one of my mentors and friends, one of the retired generals I work with, and the potential of a conflict in general, a conventional conflict, is indeed on the rise. The provocations by the Russians have caused more and more concern by the Pentagon. General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, even said in his confirmation hearings, which was quite controversial at the time, that he felt the Russians were the largest strategic threat to the United States, which caused a great deal of media, at least here. With that said, I don't believe anyone who is watching the world stage will see the move of nuclear material by the Russians and are raising our DEFCON as anything more than just posturing by both sides.
Okay, last question, and I know you've answered this partially in your previous reply, but do you see things de-escalating anytime soon?
The answer is it all depends. There are three factors which I think any rational person has to look at to make an evaluation. First, the U.S. election. As you all are aware, the common theme being put forth by the White House, this White House, is that the Russians are trying to interfere with the election. I don't buy that for a minute. I think the Russians have far more to gain regarding their continued expansion and world, I would say not dominance, but their reinsertion into the world as a superpower. They have far more to gain under a President Hillary Clinton than a President Donald Trump. Why? Because the likelihood of her continuing the current policies which have resulted in the success of the Russian re-expansion would very likely be continued. Here, one of the political issues of the day is the reset, the Hillary Clinton reset with the Russians, which I think a lot of people, everybody I talk to who's competent on this, recognizes the failure of that as an issue. So I think whatever outcome of the American election occurs, we will see what becomes of the U.S.-Russian relationship. So I think that's the first factor. Secondly, what goes on in Syria will have effects and consequences, if you will, far beyond the borders of Syria. We believe that right now the Russia, Syria, and Iran relationship, we're calling it the Damascus Pact. It's we believe an echo of the Cold War and the old Warsaw Pact, where you have the Russians working with like-minded allies in the region to establish, if you will, a condominium, a military alliance or condominium. So we see this as something that has to be examined more closely. And we've put forth, the London Center for Policy Research, and I've been working with members of Congress. I was on Capitol Hill yesterday meeting with staff. We have an alliance of members of Congress, bipartisan, looking at how we could help put together, I should say, an Arab NATO. We're calling it the Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization. It wouldn't take the place of the Arab League, but it would give military context and interoperability to those Arab nations, which I think are facing off against the Iranians and, in this case, the Russians and Syrians. So what we're trying to do is establish the ability of the region to invest in its own security. And I think part of this is being stimulated by the Russians bringing themselves into the conflict there. So the second factor is how can we work to stabilize that region within the context of the proxy warfare now going on. Third, I think the other thing we have to consider is, frankly, the world economy. We have seen where the Russians are attempting to work to be a nationalistic power to reinsinuate itself, and they are closely and I think completely economically linked to the EU. They have other relationships which have to be considered. So I do believe that these economic realities will bear some level of influence on everybody's thinking. So I think those three things will really go to determine how much or how the continuation of Russian intimidation is implemented by them, and how much the United States is able to kind of walk them back. And at this point in time, this White House, President Obama's White House, is it's a lame duck. It's not going to do anything. I've talked to a number of folks here in Washington who are just dismayed at the lack of interest of the White House in what's going on globally. So, and a lot of folks are really actually surprised that the Pentagon actually responded with military force against the Houthi rebels who fired on the USS, one of the USS destroyers off the shore of Yemen. And frankly, I believe that those radar sites and those missiles were fired by the Iranians. I don't think the Houthi rebels have the technical sophistication needed to man and fire missiles like that. So with that said, it really took the Pentagon saying, we need to do something here to push back. So I do believe that was an exception to the kind of policy direction this White House is going. But I think there are things that we just cannot predict at this point that I think will be much clearer after the 8th of November of this year.
Thank you so much, Colonel Anthony Shaffer, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
This was Colonel Anthony Shaffer discussing the topic of America and Russia escalations and a possibility of a war. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.